bringing the action from the second round of the Inland Off-Road Championship, the Baberspan 250, brought to you by 4x4 Mega World in association with Fila Africa. With round one of the series in the bag and a resounding success, we now move forward to the 250 at Baberspan, the classic race venue. Going to be based around the Pun with a 45-car entry once again, showing the popularity of this series. Start things out with the prologue as always, as all cars go out to see how they will position for the rest of the racing weekend. A couple of new entries coming in this time, a full complement coming in from the 4x4 Mega World crew, a lot of national competitors coming to dust themselves off, making sure that there was definitely no one who was a standout favourite to go forward and win the event. On paper, around about 6 or 7 crews could walk away with the flag come the end of 250 kilometres of inland off-road championship racing. A couple of new cars have been prepped for this round as well, especially in the side-by-side land, so it was definitely going to be a case of big shakedown to get themselves ready for the rest of their racing season. Within the crews as well, a lot of chopping and changing between drivers and navigators, so it's going to be exciting to see how those new pairings worked out in the bush. Good spread of classes within the categories. Categories, of course, denoted by them being either production vehicles or special vehicles, and within the categories, plenty of classes to talk about. Across the engine range and the amount of suspension they've got to play with out in the bush. Before the prologue, we headed into the pits to catch up with BD from Fila.
Good morning, BD Terblanche. We at Baberspan 250. This is our third year in a row that we are sponsors here. Behind us, some of our equipment that we do. We've got the Ural trucks here, our 595 harvester from Russia, as well as our front-end loaders, wheel loaders, and then also some implements. Enjoy the day, and yeah, we're looking forward for you to come and have a look at our equipment.
A couple of familiar faces down in the pits, but the same equal measure of new faces. We headed into a documentation and driver's briefing to make sure that everyone was on the same page. Ferdy and Dion took us through how the running was going to go and made sure that everyone knew exactly what the safety precautions were out there on the track, and if they found any beached cars, in particular side-by-sides, how to correctly and not incorrectly turn them back onto their wheels. Some helpful hints from the man with a ton of off-road championship racing experience. To the notes to make sure everyone was on the same page, and then into the lineup queue. While the cars got themselves into the queue and got themselves warmed up, we went into the queue and caught up with the crew from the famous D33.
Good morning from D33. I just want to start off by saying thanks to our sponsors, which is Tusanang, Rauco, Plason, Habit Oil, and KD Civils. This is my co-driver Gary. I'm Francois van der Walt. Gary, take us through the race.
Okay, we're here at Baberspan 250. We're looking forward to the race. It went very well with our previous race in Camille. We won the Class D there, and we're looking forward to do the same today. I see the wind is going to help us with the dust, and we believe we're going to have a good time, Charles. So thank you for all our sponsors, and we're looking forward. Thank you.
Now time to get serious as we head into the prologue to see who's going to line up first. Join us after the break to see what went down in the first 50Ks.
In Classic Rides, we revisit the past to portray the classic and veteran cars of decades gone by.
My passion goes back 27 years, and that's when I bought the first old-timer.
We meet the personalities who wrote automotive history, and we send a couple of very old cars around very fast circuits.
This is a real car, not a road car converted to a rally car. This car has a known history. It was originally a test car.
Prologue then coming off their season opening win and setting themselves out as the team to beat Stefan Van Pletzen and Jaco Pieterse in the Live Lesotho Chenoweth. We're going to be the ones to watch But of course, they were going out into virgin terrain. They were opening up the track. Everyone else was going to be chasing down the rubber that they laid down in the sand around Baberspan. Jacques Van Tonder and Sammy Redlinghuis also coming off an emphatic drive at the opening round. They'd be looking for a win in the T class, but the T's were deep and heavy as far as the talent pool went here at the Baberspan 250, brought to you by 4x4 Megaworld, and the 4x4 Megaworld crews were going to be chasing the T5 down today. The first part of the course, of course, made up of the first part of the racing loop. That would give all drivers an advantage as they went forward into the afternoon's race, which was scheduled to start at 1 o'clock. For Malcolm and Frans Koch, they came into the season with one goal, and that was to win out in the Class T's. They showed strong pace at the opening round and even stronger pace here at the prologue. In fact, in the early kilometers, they were setting themselves up as the fastest crew out there. For Jannie and Peter Visser, this was the first of the Class S buckies that we saw racing in production class category. It's going to be fun to see what they had under the hood. And it was clear from round number 1 that no one could hold anything back on the prologue, especially up in the Northwest Province when you start talking about heading into winter. Dust was going to be the story of the next 7 months at least of racing. For Dylan Venter and Donovan Lubber in their brand new colours, the first of 3 entries from the 4x4 Mega World squad, the T10 knowing exactly what they had to do. It was going to be podium chasing all the way through. 4x4 Mega World squad were going to try and get at least 2 of their crews up on the boxes. In the T class, it was going to be a big hard push for Venter and Lubber. They would need to start close to the front to put themselves in with a chance of finishing near the top come the end of 250 Ks of racing. Jason Venter and Jaco van Aert, the stronger pairing coming out of the 4x4 Mega World squad. So strong in seasons past, the T11 would be charging hard to try and get themselves onto the top step of the podium. They set themselves up for a predicted top 5 placing. That was good enough start. You can run inside the top 5 early on loop number 1 when it comes to racing. You've got a good shout of walking away with a win. Not just overall, but also in category. John Telford and Victor Nsheki, runners-up in the National Championship category for the Class A's in the special vehicles from last season, were also in the mix, and it was going to be great to see what they could do as they went straight up against a good entry coming in from the Class A's. Lawrence Boyson and Ferdy Petersen joining for the first time, no seat time at all, and an early pass to some problems for Telford and Nsheki. Not what you want in a prologue. That means you're going to be starting way down the order come race time. Some problems for Telford and Nsheki early on. Sucking dust way too soon. For Boyson and Petersen, looked like it was a match made in heaven in the early running as they put themselves in line to try and chase down a strong placing come the end of the prologue sprint. They were slowed slightly by some problems on the trip meter and the GPS, which dropped them out of the top 20 come the end. That was sorted though. They showed pace in the early half of the prologue that should see them challenge for a top 10 overall. For Pete and Benjamin Kutsia, the S11 S-Class was looking like it was going to be an absolute nail-biter. If they could qualify inside the top 15, they'd also set themselves up nicely. They too had to make an early pass on Telford and Nsheki, which were causing a lot of dust problems for many of the competitors out there. Klaus Prinsloo and Kenneth Venter, who have now got super comfortable in their former NWM Ford Ranger, the T41, set some good times in the early stages, but dropped off pace. Would eventually finish just inside the top 20 at the end of the prologue. A couple of lost corners and wrong slots were the cause of their demise. In the special vehicle category, running under the Class P's in the CRT, the number 17 of Willem de Tooy and Villani de Tooy. This crew have got a lot of people sweating out there because they can challenge for overall victories as well. We go on board to see how nice and busy it can truly be. Doing his own windscreen wiping there. Of course, the Class P's don't run a screen. And come the end of the qualifying run, the P17 stonked a top 4 time overall, and we're head and shoulders ahead of the category in the P's. For Francois van der Walt and Gerry Prinsloo, caught up with them in the pits, and they seemed very relaxed as always. as they chase down yet another victory and championship in the Class Ds. They would go out and have a couple of issues, but nothing too major, and still ran good enough numbers to squeak their way inside just of a top 10 placing overall. That would give them the class victory in the Ds, but only just, taking 4 seconds out of their closest rivals. For the G class, that's our side-by-side contingent. Marcus Labuskakny and Neil Putter charging hard to see what they can do. We often see the Class Gs go very high up in the starting order at the end of these sprint events. For the G11, it was inside of a top 10, showing that they were definitely going to be chargers in category as well as in the overalls. Vickers Harsbrook and Jürgen Smith, they showed true class and speed in the opening round. The G21 would be trying to see what they could do about getting up the order. Many crews, though, complaining about overshoots and wrong slots. That was one of the crews from the G21s, outside the top 20, where they should have been easily placed inside the top 15. For Christo Rose and Tion Swart in the G22, they didn't fare too much better as well, just squeaking their way inside of a top 15. Also, 1 or 2 small mistakes holding them back from the coveted top 10 placing. For Werner and Leon Mostert, they've become a very polished crew and one of the best prepped cars out there in the side-by-side lineup. The G2 looking for the win once again. They would have a strong challenge, getting themselves up into 7th fastest overall, 2nd fastest of the Class Gs, and only 4 seconds adrift in their class. For Dion Boyens and Sadrian de Villiers, a great lineup in the A25, a former late great Colin Matthews vehicle. It knows how to go fast. You just got to hang on and ride it out. They came home with a very respectable time, 19th fastest overall for them. They'd be pushed close actually in the early stages of the prologue by the P44 entry of Kobus Marie and Craig Galvin. An almost faultless run saw them heading well into the top 10 come the end of the prologue, and then literally with kilometers to go, a sheared off rear hub put paid to their prologue as well as the rest of the Baberspan 250. This would be the last time we saw the P44 on the weekend. In D class, the D11 on Tion Statoy and James O'Mahony also getting themselves ready for what would be a very strong time come the end of the prologue. Everything was perfect until, with kilometers to go, the bonnet popped open, they had to slow, and that dropped them down into 17th overall. It was a case of what could have been for them. For the D27, Dierwald and Anton Nienaber, they charged up the order. No real major problems, just eased their way into the prologue and walked home with a respectable 14th place overall. That'll set them up nicely in the event. For Louis Weichelt and Hanneke Erasmus, the D44 had major navigational problems on the prologue that would see them starting almost at the back of the queue. Doesn't matter what they did after the chase back onto the right route, the damage was done. They were starting outside of the top 30. For the twin turbo diesel running 3.2 power out of the Ford Ranger, the pairing of Stain Viviers and Richard Carey in the S777, which is more famous for its sound than its looks. Running out on the course these days, a very steady run saw them qualify just outside of a top 20, 23rd overall come the end of the prologue. The P51 of Tony and Mike Cavea, former champions in the Class Ps, running in special vehicle productions. They're going to be pushed very hard this season by the charging Willem de Toy, but this time around, simply just not fast enough. No mistakes, no problems, no errors, no mechanicals. Just speed was not quite there. 15th place means it's going to be a dusty day for the Cavallos. Gotta love the D class. It is absolutely fantastic and the closest times on the tick. The D1 of Lawrence Van Beek and Moni Roux, second fastest, but only losing out by 4 seconds to their competitors. Jaco Bisa and Johan Mostert in the D5. They didn't climb as high up the order as they wanted to. They'd be qualifying outside of a top 25, making hard work for themselves throughout the rest of the 200 kilometers of racing at the Baberspan 250, brought to you by 4x4 Mega World in association with Vila. With no problems or issues reported coming in from the E1 bucky of Andre Geldenes and Victor Fensham, it was simply a case that this was not going to be an easy day for the Class E buckies, obviously running down on power and down on suspension. They would be finishing outside of a top 25 and running second in category. the E-Class would be really having to work for their money at the Baberspan 250, which is known as a bit of a bucky breaker. For Aki and Jandre Kruger in the E7, they were a little bit out of the top 30, 34th place to be precise. It was going to be a battle of uphill proportions to try and climb their way onto the podium for the rest of the day's racing. The normally rock-solid entry of the D16 of Regan Austin and Warren Foss had major issues on the car. Gearbox problems on the offload. They had to work through the night, only completing the car at 2:30 in the AM. Then, unfortunately, tie rod problems in the prologue saw them run in two-wheel drive and finish near dead last on 42nd position. Dead last in the lineup queue, unfortunately, went to the D22 of Wayne and Keith Smith. They got wildly lost in the early stages and almost caused major problems for Hein Kruger as he set on off out the gate. We had the onboard footage to show exactly what went down. Not the kind of bar-to-bar racing you expect to have in the early stages of a prologue. For Wayne and Keith Smith, it was just a nightmare start to their Baberspan 250. They eventually got on track, but the time was so far out, they knew they were dead last. For Hein Kruger and Paul Moret, of course, they had their issues out there on the track, having to take some evasive driving maneuvers, which would have definitely spiked the heart rates and maybe caused some issues in the cab. After that, one or two little wrong slots, but not a bad time come the end of gameplay. Top 20 overall for Kruger and Moret. Just finishing inside of a top 30 was the game plan for Dirk Putter and Henny Hutting. The E4, as we've said, the E-Buckies really took a pounding. Most of the crews came to the end of the prologue knowing they would have to change their complete approach and setup. It was clear that the Baberspan 250 was going to be a survival event. For Ignace Duplessis and Jean Vermaak in the Isuzu running the turbo diesel, great to see them charging hard. They would once again just try and bring the Deep Civils vehicle home, the E18, looking for a top 25 finish come the end of the prologue to try and stay away from the back marker dust that was going to be an issue for anyone qualifying outside of the top 35. With 44 cars in the queue, it was going to be super busy and always tough to make those risky overtaking maneuvers. It was clear that the way the track was laid out, any mistakes would be severely punished. For Rudolf de Toy and Ben Sutherland, great setup in their bucky as they rolled forward into the rest of the 2019 tour. The E11 would also be trying to get themselves up the order to try and stay away from the dust. That was everyone's goal, knowing how dry it has been in the closing weeks coming up to this event. For Johan Stein and Ronald Smith, the B-Class was going to be more than a challenge. Less power, less travel, smaller wheels, and difficult conditions to try and get through. Siegfried van Schalkwyk and Arthur Croshaw in the B100 bug had to be pre-race favourites coming into this event. They're very familiar with this terrain and know exactly how to get the best out of their bug. They would be challenged though with a formidable entry coming in for the B-Class, the B111 of Johan Besson and Rudy van Heerden. So fast out the blocks, we've seen them in events in the past charge hard. They would also throw down a strong time of a top 25 to run high numbers in the B-Class. The new setup on the B15 of Vince van Alleman and Theo Roos, running high suspension on the bug. And the third entry coming in from the 4x4 Mega World squad. There was going to be no problem with the setup on this vehicle, and the B15 would be one to watch out for in the early stages, climbing up into the heady heights of 22nd overall and first in class. Henry Zamatin and Alicia Potkida in the D69 would simply ease their way into the day's running. A respectable time put them inside of a top 30. They'd line up 27th overall, putting some big hitters behind them. A nice approach to this very tough and demanding event that is the Baberspan 250. For the D88 of Altaf Meher, he had Ahmed Jada, who's normally driving his own Nissan. This time around, he was in the suicide chair, shouting the notes. The crew would get themselves comfortable, so weren't expecting to see some good times coming in at the end of prologue. They simply wanted to get through it, learn from each other, get comfy in the cab, and attack the race come 1 o'clock when the rest of the 200 kilometers of racing would unfold. for the E8 entry of Frikkie Steen and Conrad Mentz, one of the many E-Class buckies trying to get the job done in their class. They would have to go up against the rest of the Class E's as well as the rest of the other classes running under production vehicle categories. To give an idea of the difference between Class A and Class T, around about 8 minutes on a 50k loop. That is how tough it is out there in the Class E's. For Suma Smith, now alongside Gabby Costa, who is about to, the weekend after this event, become Gabby Petersen, and we offer their congratulations to her and Ferdy. They went out in the P81, getting comfortable once again to try and climb the ladder within their class. They would eventually come home with a respectable third in class. Sitting outside the top 30 overall would mean a dusty day for the only all-lady entry. For Gerry van der Bijl, coming back from Dakar on the bikes and getting into the side-by-side for the first time with Andrew Kate, the G129 would be a development car throughout the weekend, literally getting finished by the Mostards the day before the event. This was very much getting used to each other and the car. In the prologue, report back to the crew and just try and make notes and learn throughout the rest of the day's event. The last car out the gate would be the last car to finish, getting stuck out on the pan, the E22 of Bernard and Minette Johnston, losing a full 20 minutes on the prologue. But as in off-road racing, the idea is survival. They were at the bottom of the queue, but they still got into the start line order come race time. Just under a minute and a half separated the top 7, with Kok at the top of the pile, chased down by Stefan van Pletsen and Jaco Petersen. That was going to be an all-out battle between the categories of production vehicle and specials. Van Tonder and De Toy would also be warring for that third place overall. Dylan Venter did a good job to get himself inside of a top 8 overall. He'd be chased down by Yanni and Peter Visser. Strong runs throughout all the categories, and the all-important top 14 would have the best chance to stay away from the dust of the rest. Join us after the break when we go into the rest of the Baberspan 250 with 200 kilometers of racing still to go.
This time on Mega Truckers.
Don't ever say Australians.
Two drivers go to war.
Bro, stop going on about Kiwi. I'm a Kiwi, bro. Get over it.
And threaten to derail a monster move.
I think he's a bit dropped at birth, to be honest, but he's a bit of a sook. He'll harden up.
Boss John lays down the law.
If Wayne and Keith can't get on, one of them has to go.
And hopes an old truck can save the day.
John's brought the deadline forward, just trying to get everything done that he wants done to his standard. We put a lot of effort and time into this thing, so if he gets here and he's not happy, we're not going to be very impressed.
This week we take the VW Arteon across a frozen Swedish lake. Burn up the track with a McLaren 600 LT. And check out the Seat Tarraco's climate credentials.
Welcome back to our coverage of round 2 of the Inland Off-Road Championship for 2019, brought to you by 4x4 Mega World in association with Fila. The prologue is a thing of the past, but what is present is the fact that everyone is now into the queue and chasing this man, Malcolm Kok, alongside younger son Frans Kok in the T8. They put a full, thank you very much, 26 seconds into Stefan van Pletsen and Jaco Petersen in the A3. They're the leading special vehicle and leading in the Class A's, and they'll be chased down by the second of the Class T's, Jacques Van Tonder and Sammy Redlinghuis. Small gaps though would be the story of the rest of the day. Just 5 seconds the gap, going back to Willem de Toy, the first of the Class P's. So de Toy would be instantly into the dust. A no-show for Jason Venter in the T11 4x4 Mega World Toyota meant that Marcus Labuskakny and Neil Putter in the G11 had a little bit of respite, but they'd come under instant pressure from a ton of buckies who were absolutely charging out the gate. The D-Class showing how close their qualifying was. Then Christo Rose and Tion Swart, the second entry, coming in from the side-by-sides, chased down by Prinsloo and Venter right on their wheel, Dierwald and Anton Nienaber. The first lap was going to be a wild one. Maybe not a bad call for the P51 of Tony and Mike Gavea to hold something back in their qualifying run to try and stay out of that dust ball that made up the top 10. Dion Boyens and Sadrian de Villiers in the A25 may have played the same game, but many crews came back off the prologue. suffering from overshoots and wrong slotting, meaning there were some fast crews at the back that would make their way forward. Haasbrook and Smith, Piet and Benjamin Kotze in the S11 were definitely part of that group. Hein Kruger and Paul Murray couldn't get the hammer down early on, getting absolutely stuck in the dust, and spare a thought for Lawrence Boysons and Ferdy Petersen, as well as the whole chain of crews that qualified outside of the top 25 and were racing straight into each other's dust. For now, the 4x4 buggy was doing a great job in the hands of Van Aert to try and run some clear air. Everyone else was eating it. In Class B, the B111 of Johan Besson and Rudy van Heerden on paper were chasing down the 4x4 Mega World buggy, but in reality were under instant pressure from a ton of Class D buckies. They would have to make hay while the sun was shining and try and run away into the clear air and leave the rest languishing in the dust. Andre Gillenhuis and Victor Fensham had a Fenton trailer in the form of Dirk Putter and Henny Hutting in the early stages. When you're that close, there is no other option than to swipe left and stay off the track. Johan Steyn and Ronald Smith, a low qualifier with no one really around them, they'd have a lonely first couple of kilometers of the loop. Same story for the E7 of Aki and Jandre Kruger, who were possibly going to get closed down by Mahir and Jada as they started to get more comfortable in the E88. Aki and Jandre Kruger were going to have some fun on their wheels as Gerry van der Bijl and Andrew Katay in the G129 got used to what it is to have no windscreen and take the sand. For Du Toit and Sutherland, the E11 had a poor run in their qualifying, as well as Sifa van Skalkvik and Arthur Croshaw. The B100 should be able to cope well in these kind of dusty conditions. It's what he's used to, it's what he's grown up with. Suma Smith and Gabby Costa, the P81, third in the P class, would look to try and climb the ladder and try and find some more gears in the box in the early running. As with the past running of this event, the classic and brutal Baberspan 250, it was going to be about survival. Not necessarily the fastest pace would win, but simply the crew that could survive and maintain their vehicle the best over the remaining 200 kilometers of racing. For Regan Austin and Warren Foss, the mechanicals of the prologue had to be put out of their minds as they charged to try and climb the ladder in Class D. Wayne and Keith Smith, it was all about focusing on navigation for the rest of the event to try and claw back some kind of a result for the D22. Out onto the loop, and in the first 20 kilometers, it is clear what had happened. Having to open up the route had cost Malcolm Koch and Frans Koch that all valuable time. They had a 26-second buffer. It's gone. Stefan Van Pletsen and Jaco Petersen making the pass just outside of 20 kilometers, and it was then up to the Chenoweth in the Live Lesotho colours. The A3 would run clear air for the next 100 kilometers until they came into the end of the first racing loop. Malcolm and Frans Koch did a good enough job to remain in second place and first in class, with Jacques Van Tonder and Sammy Redlinghuis not able to close their gap, obviously just stuck in the dust and losing a further 10 to 15 seconds on loop number 1 in the early stages. They were still doing a good enough job to challenge inside of second place for the Class Ts. Looking to try and trouble the top steps in the overall and extend his lead in the Class Ps was Willem de Toy alongside wife Villani. They were doing a fantastic job. They showed they're a classy pairing. On the wheel, Willem is near on untouchable and one of the few drivers who's really come to terms with the automatic gearbox on the CRT. They remained on timing and scoring and physically on the road in 4th place and 1st in Class P. Great shot to see a little bit of dust up the road, and they know exactly who they are chasing down. They're trying to get onto the wheel of the Class T Ford Ranger. Dylan Venter and Donovan Lover trying to fly the flag for the 4x4 Mega World squad. They did a good run in qualifying, coming out in 8th place, and they made some early lap passes to get through on some slower traffic. Marcus Labuskakny and Neil Putter in the G11 had been sent back. In fact, Dylan Venter had springboarded from 8th up into 5th overall, and he had to do it as well. because Yanni and Peter Visser in the S2 were absolutely charging hard. They were light years ahead of the rest of the Class S buckies and trying to challenge their way inside of a top 5 overall. Werner and Leon Mostert, who had qualified in 7th place, had a rough run of it in the first 30 or so kilometers. They were sitting in 2nd place in the Class G side-by-sides for now. Dust and getting stuck in people's dust had slowed their pace. For the affable D33 crew, qualifying out of the top 10, they were once again going to be trying to see what they could do to stay ahead in the Class D challenge, who were going to come under instant pressure from Lawrence van Beek. On board just to show you how difficult it is. This is what they call long grass in off-road championship racing. Very difficult to spot any of the lurkers, and if you go into the veld, you just simply do not know what is there. A beautiful long shot from our camera showing into the background the chasers, Lawrence van Beek and Moni Roux in the D1. They started just 4 seconds off the back wheel of Prinsloo, but had to drop back to stay away from the dust. Trying to get up and mix it up with the top 3 in production vehicles for the Class Ts. The T41 of course, Prinsloo and Kenneth Venter. They'd had a nice run in their qualifying, 13th place, but they were going to have to make a ton of passes. They'd already dispatched the side-by-side and a few of the lower categories, so they were on the move. Force was charging, and he was bringing Anton and Dierwald Nienober along for the ride. That meant that the side-by-side, the G22 of Christo Rose and Tion Swart, had been dispatched and been put into the dust. What happens with the side-by-sides is they always have to roll out of it. They've got no windscreen and no clearance, so they've got to wait until they can physically see through their visors before they can go and attack. The way that the marking was done on the Baberspan 250 was extremely skinny. Also, a crew that were charging hard was Tony and Mike Gavea. They'd done a good job to get through a little bit of traffic, and they were bringing an absolute freight train along with them, as everyone who qualified low was starting to build up their pace. Boyson and Peterson gelling nicely in the buggy. Join us after the break for the next 100 Ks of the Baberspan 250.
We're going to go up Snowshoe Mountain. We're going up the mountain in an SUV. We're going to put Kumho tires on a Porsche. We're going to be able to check out this Porsche and how good these tires handle. Also, what we're going to do is I'm going to take you on the Hatfield-McCoy trail system on UTVs. And we have 3 UTVs.
Why have we got 3 of them, Greg? It's you and me.
In this episode of GP Racing, we preview the Bahrain Grand Prix, Renault's faltering start to the season, a feature on Williams driver Robert Kubica, electric karts, and Formula Renault Euro Cup from Hungary.
Join us as we continue our coverage from round 2 of the Inland Off-Road Championship for 2019, brought to you by 4x4 Mega World in association with Fila. Out on the track, having dispatched Koch, now running in clear air and extending off the front, the A3 of Stefan Van Plitzen and Jaco Petersen, looking for the perfect start to their racing season. If they take it to the flag, it's going to be a clean 2 for 2. On the road, a massive story, the P17 of Willem and Villani de Toy. Now, a surprise package moving up into 2nd place. What happened to Malcolm Koch? It all went wrong for himself and France. Running 2nd place, they overshot, and unfortunately, while they were doing the turnaround, hit a metal pole, pierced their fuel tank, and that was their day done. There would be a no-show for the rest of the Baberspan 250, an event that is so close to their hearts. For Willem and Villani de Toy, an absolutely perfect situation now has them in clear air, running in 2nd place. One of the stories of lap number 1, though, was at charging. Yanni Visser and Peter Visser qualifying in 9th place, now up into 3rd place overall on the road, and light years ahead of the rest of the field in the production vehicle Class S buckies. On loop 1, this was one of the fastest crews out there. Of course, Prinsloo and Kenneth Venter had also charged through the pack, getting themselves up into 2nd place for the Class Ts. The 1 or 2 overshoots wasn't really slowing them down. The aggressive Prinsloo in the T44 was getting themselves all the way up the order, having qualified in 13th, now challenging inside of a top 5 overall and 2nd in class, meaning they had made 7 physical passes out on loop 1. One of the big stories on lap 1 was the demise of Jacques Van Tonder and Sammy Redlinghuis. They'd qualified high up the order and now were languishing after mechanical issues held them back. For Marcus Labuschagne and Neil Putter, the G11 doing a great job. Qualified in the top 6, were just outside the top 6 at this stage, but we're definitely going to be the leading side by side. No one was going to be able to get through the dust to try and challenge the back wheel of the G11. Werner and Leon Mostert were going to be the closest challengers, but they were going to have to be stuck behind some big traffic. Lawrence Boyson and Ferdy Petersen doing a sterling job in the 830. They'd qualified way down the order, 21st, were now challenging to get themselves up. They were inside the top 10 already and were hoping to get onto the podium now in the Class A's. They were predicted at the pace they ran to run a number 2 by the finish line. Boyson and Petersen had also had a busy loop number 1, passing, count them, 15 cars to make their way into a top 6 overall. Dion Boyson and Sadrian de Villiers in the 825 had been steady about their approach to the event. They were also looking to challenge in the Class A's. It was between themselves and Boyson to see who was going to be on the number 2 step in Class A. For Vickers Haasbroek and Jurgen Smith, they'd also got themselves into a position to try and challenge for second place in the side-by-side G-Class. Pete and Benjamin Kotzer in the S11 were a crew also now into a top 10, qualifying 19th and making a strong push of it on loop number 1. We were expecting that as well. Stan Viviers, the twin-turbo diesel Ford Ranger in the S777 alongside Richard Carey, stepping just outside of a top 10 overall, but starting to challenge up the order. Wayne and Keith Smith starting at the back of the pack. Tippy-toeing, clearly mechanical issues holding them back. They may have just pushed it a little bit too hard on loop number 1. For Werner and Leon Mostert in the G2, they'd qualified second fastest in a number 7 position. But having to come out the gate and stuck in people's dust had slowed their run. They were sitting in a predicted 3rd place in category and were going to potentially finish just outside the top 10. For Jacques Van Tonder and Sammy Redlinghuis in the T5, after coming off a 3rd fastest qualifier and 1st of the Class Ts, they were now having to do a fight back after early mechanical problems dropped them down the order. The front of the T5 rode to Dakar Ranger, telling a story of how much dust they had been eating the whole way through. Mercifully, this crew at least has a windscreen. Tony and Mike Gavea do not have that luxury though. The P51 qualifying a low number 15 were slowly making their way up the order to try and challenge for a top placing, possibly a number 2 finish in Class P. A steady approach to the car eater that is the Baberspan 250. Not a bad way of getting into this event. The Baberspan 250 eats up cars. If you can bring it to the line, you are often rewarded with a podium. Christo Rose and Tion Swart from G22 getting dispatched early on loop number 1 by the freight train of cars that qualified low down the order behind them. They were trying to get onto pace with the Mosterts, predicted though for a 4th place finish come the end of the race. For Frikkie Steyn and Conrad Mantz in the E8, it had been a tough ride from the back after a rough qualifier sent them way down the order. They were simply trying to bring it home for the finish. And where it may, let the chips lie. Maybe it was going to be a podium, maybe just off. An eventful prologue and qualifier for Kruger and Marais. They were once again going to be fighting hard to get the job done. We go on board as they stare into some clear air just on the outskirts of the punt. By this stage, the track nicely cut it up, rutted in, and the D5 were having a nice lap of it on loop number 2. Ruining though their rough qualifier. Andre Geldenhuis and Victor Fincham in the E1 had an absolute nightmare of an event. Just wanted to put the Baberspan 250 behind them. They'd had a good run on loop number 1, battling nicely with Dirk Putter and Henny Hutting. But the second loop was their undoing, unable to attack with fading brake problems that eventually let go with 8 TKs to go, forcing the team to drive on the gearbox. They did make it, but only just. Beautiful shots showing the Northwest Province and the classic race venue of the Baberspan 250. This coverage, as always, brought to you by the 4x4 Mega World crew alongside with, for this event, Fella. Early dust coming in the Northwest, And for the rest of our championship race season, it's going to be Dust Bowl racing. Super busy for the crews, but they know exactly what to do, how to set their cars up and get the best across all categories and classes that race within them. A beautiful entry list though, giving us once again at round number 2, 45 cars in the queue. For Gerry van der Bijl and Andrew Kate, as they set their sights on Dakar 2020, this was all just golden training and practice for the pair. On board with Francois van der Walt and Gerry Prinsloo, would often expect to see the D33 running much faster pace, even in tight bush and scrub like this, but it was braking issues as once again dogged the D33. Rear caliper had come loose, forcing them to simply tiptoe. Then, towards the end of the loop, drive shaft issues put paid to their event. The rest of the crews now were in survival mode. One of the strongest survivors out there is Siegfried van Schalkwyk Arthur Croshaw. The B100 Bug had qualified low down the order and was starting to come under pressure from Steyn and Smith in the B67. A lot of traffic was coming into view in the closing kilometers, with cars limping their way into the finish line and all fading like a flower. Some were getting stronger though. Ignis du Plessis and John van Mark in the E18 had been charging up the order in the turbo-powered Isuzu. This was going to be one of the stories of crews that simply didn't attack too hard, but brought it home. For Regan Austin and Warren Foss, it was also a nightmare start to their weekend. Gearbox, then front shaft problems, and eventually in the main race, even though they were being cautious, a flat tyre held them off the podium, but they made it to the finish. For Bernard and Minette Johnston, the E22, one of our final crews to set off out of the gate, were also approaching this car eater of an event with caution and simply wanted to load the car onto the trailer with all wheels and body panels still intact. The B111 of Johan Besson and Rudy van Heerden on loop number 1 had been one of the highest charges. Flat tyres and mechanicals had held them back. They were now just simply trying to get to the finish. Louis Weichelt and Heineke Erasmus in the D44, same story for them. When you qualify outside of a top 35, it's always going to be a tough ask. Still, the D44 was going to be in a position come the end of this race to possibly challenge for the remaining podium position. Slow and steady, and bring it on home. So often that is the approach for off-road championship racing that brings you the cheese. Hockey and Jandre Kruger had to do a real management situation on their car. The fan packing up on the start line and having to nurse this car for 200 kilometers in order for it not to overheat. They did a good enough job to, amazingly enough, finish 4th in class. That's a story. For the locals up in the area around Baberspan, they were just simply enjoying the show and trying to stay out the way. Join us after the break as we take it to the line of the Baberspan 250.
In the 1950s, America had broken free from the shackles of wartime economics. It was walking with the swagger of a nation that had the world by the tail. Scientists had harnessed nuclear energy. Jet-propelled airplanes were breaking speed records, and the race to space was on. But perhaps more than anything else, one thing melded imagination and consumerism, putting this era in perfect context: the concept car.
I got a phone in my car and I'm on the run. I know what it takes to be number one, and I'll be riding high when the day is done. I'm just out here having fun.
I've been buying, selling, and trading classic cars for 40 years. I work here with my beautiful wife, Robin, and we have a great team. Some people call it work, but for us, it's a whole lot more. I'm Ted Vernon, and this is my place, South Beach Classics.
Yeah.
On the last loop, the Baberspan 250 really started to live up to its name as a car eater. The T10, that was the second of the 4x4 Mega World Toyotas, unfortunately falling out while Donovan was running inside of a top 5. Gerry Prinsloo was also one of the hardest chargers, and the D33 eventually snapping off a back wheel along with a drive shaft just 12 Ks before the finish. An absolutely pearler of a run though out front for Stefan van Pletsen and Jaco Pieterse. Only beaten in the prologue, but unbested and unbeaten on lap 1 and lap 2 as they hammered the nail and cruised it home for a category win in the specials and a class win in special vehicle Class A. The Liv Lesotho Chenoweth going 2 for 2 at the opening 2 rounds of the season. Willem and Villani du Toit, we know how fast this pair are, but to take a second place overall is a huge result at one of the toughest rounds of the championship. The Baberspan 250, second overall, second in special vehicles and first of the Class Ps. The hardest charger on production vehicles at this round was the Class S2 of Jannie and Peter Visser, making more passes than anyone else out there to get themselves third place on the road and win out their class. An emphatic drive from Jannie and his younger son, Peter Visser. For Vos Prinsloo and Kenneth Venter, they would walk away with a huge run, getting second place in Class T. A ton of passes coming in from the Ford driver, and he is really turning into one of those class acts who may well be taking the trophy come the end of the 2019 season. Marcus Labuskakny and Neil Putter will accredit their result down to a hard charge and a very well-timed push in the prologue. Lining up 6th place, they stayed inside of a top 5 overall and were the first of the Class G side-by-sides. With the crown of the most passes on the event, Lawrence Boyson and Ferdy Petersen in the A30 with notes flapping in the cab charged their way up to get themselves a second place in Class A and a third overall in special vehicles. That was one impressive drive coming through that many cars. 15 passes all in all come the end of the event. For Lawrence Van Veek and Moni Roo, the D class was always going to be a big challenge to see if they could get themselves into a position. On corrected time, the D1 amazingly getting a number 5 finish overall across all categories. That's a huge run. Vickers Haasbroek and Jürgen Smith in the G21. A nice drive from them put them up into second place. That should see them remain in the championship points lead as they head to round number 3. Werner and Leon Mostert in the G2 pushed hard on loop number 2, lost too much time on loop number 1, and would eventually get themselves into third place in the Class Gs, but top 6 overall. For Jacques Van Tonder and Sammy Redlickhuis, unfortunately it wasn't going to be the top step this time around, but a great fight back after mechanicals would see them in the number 2 position for the Class T production vehicles, and also inside of a top 10, 7th place in fact, overall within all categories. A good fight back after those mechanicals. Tony and Mike Gabea, what a story for the P51. Former champions in category. 4th place, 1 position off the box. Valuable championship points. Also a crew that made more than 10 passes out there on the loops. Frikkie Steyn and Conrad Mentz, the E8, doing a sterling job also to arrive at the finish line in one piece. Didn't have to get out the car, but unfortunately had too much traffic and too much time to try and catch up at the end of the event. Behind Kruger and Paul Moret, also a low qualifier set them up on the back foot on loop number 1, but they got themselves up inside of a top 10, and they will get a number 2 finish in Class Ds. That's a nice comeback drive from Kruger and Moret in the D25. For Tias du Toit and James O'Mahony, a nice approach, even though they had their issues in the prologue. The D11 arriving in single digits, 9th place in production vehicles, and they would finish on the podium at the second round of the season, 3rd place for them. The A25 of Dion Boyens and Sadrian de Villiers, closely followed by Putter and Hutting. One by one, our remaining crews were coming on home, but there was a lot still out there on the loop, with mechanicals that can be fixed and some that were going to go on the meat wagon. Christo Rose and Tion Swart would be credited a nice 4th place finish in the G class, with Class S, the 777 of Viviers and Carey actually having a good run of it in the twin-turbo diesel-powered Ford Ranger. Pete and Benjamin Kotzer in the SE11 would also climb the ladder. They would be challenging in the Class S, in fact looking like they were going to get a number 2 finish. The E1 of Andre Geldernis and Victor Fincham would be credited with a rock-solid 3rd place on the podium. Probably something that the E1 team didn't dream about coming in after their prologue. For Van der Bijl and Katay, the G129 did a nice job. Top 5 at their dust-off event in a box-fresh car. 4th place in Class E for production vehicles. Rudolf du Toit and Ben Sutherland would have been super happy with that. And again, it was a case of survival beats the flat-out pace. Austin and Foss also just off the box, 4th place finish for them, and a lot of work to spin the spanners to get the car ready for round number 3. The Johnstons, who are one of our late entries coming in at the end of the queue, the E22 brought it home and inside of a top 20 overall. Congrats to those guys. Johan Besson and Rudy Van Heerden in the B111, after unfortunate mechanicals and punches held them back. The B111 still brought it home in respectable times to challenge for podium placings. For Aki and Jandre Kruger, the overheating problems definitely held them back. They weren't able to run the pace that they wanted to, but they were able to bring the car home in one piece to get ready to go forward for the rest of this championship racing tour. The B100, the bug of Sifi van Skalkwyk and Arthur Croshaw, did manage to get themselves into position, and it looked like they were going to be able to get a number 2 place finish in the Class Bs. For the Class Ps, it looked like a 3rd place finish for Suma Smit and Gabby Costa, even though they had starter motor problems out there on the track and had to do some running repairs. Louis Weichelt and Heineke Erasmus, great job, great drive, very mature approach for the D44 to bring it home safe, clean, no mechanicals. That wasn't the story for everyone, but those that came home were rewarded with a ton of championship points. This is how the categories broke down. In Special Vehicle Class A, no surprise for Van Pletzen and Pieterse to stomp their authority on this event ahead of Lawrence Boyson and Ferdy Pieterse, who charged through the pack and brought along Dion Boyens and Sadrian de Villiers. Class B was about Johan Besson and Rudy Van Heerden getting their win. Onto production vehicles, in the Class Ds went to Van Veek and Roux, beating out Kruger and Murray. Class E's all about Putter and Hutting, beating out Gildenace and Fincham. A lot of comeback drives in the Class Ds and E's. In Class G, the side-by-sides, Marcus Labuskakny and Neil Putter dominating after that great prologue performance to beat out Haasbrook and Smith. And in production vehicles Class T, Prinsloo and Fenter charging from outside the top 10 to take their win ahead of the comeback kit, Van Tonda and Redlinghuis. Class S, all about Jannie and Peter Visser dominating, putting 32 minutes into their closest rivals. For the Class Ps, Willem and Villani de Toy getting an exceptional drive going, 2nd fastest overall, and beating out the rest of the Class Ps, all recording finishes. In the overall productions, Jannie and Peter Visser beating out Force Prinsloo and Kenneth Venter, with Marcus Labuskakny and Neil Putter giving us a Class S, T and G in the top 3. And the overall for the specials, Stefan Van Pletzen and Jaco Pieterse ahead of Willem and Villani de Toy, with Lawrence Boyson and Ferdy Pieterse in 3rd place. Tony and Mike Gavea recording the 4th fastest time of all the specials. A good spread of the classes as well throughout the top 6. Celebration time at the Baberspan 250. Well, certainly celebration for the guys that made it home. Guys and girls, that is. A very tough 250 kilometers of racing. The Baberspan 250 living up to its name as one of the toughest events on the circuit. A lot of work for drivers, navigators, and the unsung heroes of the sport, the race engineers and the mechanics. They've got a lot of work to do before they get themselves ready for the next event on the tour. A short gap as well. The 13th of April and a new venue of Mafeking will take us to round 3 of the series. For those that made it onto the box and walked away with the trophies, they also walked away with a ton of championship points and set themselves up nicely. Round 1 was a sterling turnout. Round 2 was the same, averaging out over the 2 rounds of the brand new tour for the Inland Off-Road Championship, brought to you by 4x4 Mega World in association with FILA, an average entry of 44 crews, making everyone very happy, knowing that the future is looking strong as they go through into the rest of the series. A big thanks goes out to the Baberspan Motor Club, who once again hosted us for this event, the landowners and everyone who came to support and sometimes pick up the pieces of the cars that were left at the end of this car eater. All the crews now get themselves ready for Mafeking, round 3 of the championship tour. By now, championship points are starting to form up nicely. Everyone knows who is up the road, everyone knows who's behind them, and everyone now definitely knows who to beat for the rest of 2019. We'll be there for the rest of the tour to bring you all of the drama as it unfolds from Baberspan and the Baberspan 250. Thank you and goodbye.